introducing that concept to us. Because a lot of us here are involved in action, I wonder whether you could imagine for us the sort of practical actions or projects that one could do along the lines of initiatives grounded in this concept.
Yeah, without addressing the single issue actions, I would say that one of the most important things that we can do right now is recognize that your single, let's say you're working on world hunger, you're working on environmental issues, human rights issues, to recognize the interdependence of your particular issue, and to recognize, as Paul Hawken in the book he's recently published has suggested, that the international groups, all the NGOs across the world, which he's identified as there are hundreds of thousands of NGOs, they're all working for something similar, which is they're either working within the general area of social justice or environmental reform or indigenous rights, and that those basic issues are tied together in a unique way. And once we begin to understand the interdependence of the issues, then we begin to see ourselves not as non-governmental organizations so much, or civil society organizations, but as global commons organizations. I'd like to draw a distinction here in this way. Non-governmental organizations is very disempowering kind of terminology, because it suggests that we're satellites of governments. Civil society is somewhat disempowering because it doesn't suggest anything proactive. It says that we're part of a third alternative, but it doesn't say where we're going. Global Commons organizations does suggest a new dimension, a new direction for us. So specifically, what we can do is to begin to recognize that the interdependence of the issues is paramount. And that if I'm working on world hunger, then I have to see how it relates to the other issues. And immediately that plunges me into a new terminology, which is the global commons. That's the most important thing that I think, from my standpoint here, in talking about all the different NGOs, that's the most important thing to recognize.
Thank you. Yes, please. We're almost done. Okay.
Hello, thank you. My name is Steve, and I'm from the United States. I was just wondering, how do you see this becoming attractive to local people, local communities? How do you see this idea, this concept being kind of understood at high leadership levels and then on a local community? For example, if I go to a local salon or barber shop, I get my hair cut, I go to a bakery, I'm talking to a baker, how do we break this down so that it becomes attractive, it is seen as a necessity and made a priority among the average citizens of my respective country and the respective countries of the other people here?
Well, first of all, it already is attractive to people at the local level because the commons has been a local concept until recently. So the commons is community-based development. The commons is self-organizing government. The commons is local communities taking charge, empowering themselves to do the things that business and their larger government have not been able to address. So it involves the principle of subsidiarity, taking decisions at the lowest possible level, organizing and moving ahead with decisions about the local problem, the common space area, the common issue that is affecting the people locally. So I think all you need to do is not introduce a new concept, but talk about common problems and the way people are organizing at the local level, and that they've already and always been organizing at the local level, but they've always felt a bit disempowered because they don't have a larger narrative in which to plug in, in which to see themselves. Here is the difference now, that local communities across the world see themselves in this light, and then they begin to partner, and they recognize that there's a common thread among all the problems across the world, that there are many global common problems that are of a local nature, but they're so ubiquitous, they're so overarching, that there now needs to be a regime at the global level for a global commons. And many international leaders are recognizing this. Prince El Hassan of Jordan gave a speech at the United Nations General Assembly in May talking about the global commons. And many other leaders are beginning to address this new narrative as something that is important to recognize and to understand. So it's not that there's going to be too much of a difficulty because it's an idea that people already understand in their communities. But in the past, people have not understood that it is part of a larger global framework, and that's the key thing to emphasize now.
Yes, back in the back, please.
In terms of intellectual property, we're seeing development of the commons, for example, open source software, Linux operating systems, things like that, where people are taking control of it. But in the realm of hard assets, isn't it still a challenge in order to get governments to recognize that private property or public property, for that matter, should be shared in common and not turned over to private businesses, certainly with the way the government here has done things? There still is a vested interest in keeping control of hard assets, hard items. How do you propose changing that?
Well, again, you brought up a good example of intellectual property rights. Many people think that the WTO has gone too far in their interpretations of what should legitimately be privatized, for example. In terms of, and we all know in terms of the internet, there's a big question about what is legitimately private and what is really in the common domain. And it's bringing to light a lot of different questions about a lot of different resource regimes across the world that have either been privatized or nationalized, and now people are wanting to reclaim the common space. Think of the water rights in Bolivia, think of the high seas and fisheries of the world, the rainforests. And your question is how to, I'm guessing that your question is, when these things are already privatized, how do you roll that back, or how do you change what's already been instituted? Well, this is the key question. This is why people need to organize as global commons organizations across the world to begin to address that problem at that level. And it can be addressed at the national level and at the international level through the WTO. But this is not just a philosophical question anymore, because the idea here is that the private sector and the public sector have enclosed and owned so much of the world's resources at this point that it leaves little space left for understanding common goods. And once people begin to organize, then they have to analyze where the legitimate boundaries are, and in what cases do the limits and of this encroachment need to be rolled back.
If I went over here, are there any questions over here? Like this?
Thank you. As we see today, our work really became like one global market with this economical globalization. And as I know, Marshall's plan was connected to a monetary system. And what do you think, what kind of changes in monetary system could benefit our human family? For example, appearance of a worldwide currency that can replace all our currency. Thank you.
That's a great question, and the Marshall Plan wasn't exactly related to currency, but I'll link the two things. The Marshall Plan was about foreign aid, essentially, but at the same time, the International Monetary Fund was created, and the International Monetary System was created around the same time that the Marshall Plan took place, back in the 1940s, early 1950s. The monetary system now is breaking down. A lot of real problems can be associated with currencies. There's no doubt about that. Just read the financial papers every day. This isn't a crisis that happened overnight. It's a result of the way the monetary system was set up long ago. And the flaws that John Maynard Keynes pointed out 60 years ago in the development of the Bretton Woods system, the IMF and World Bank, and the way the monetary system was set up are all now coming to fruition. They're all making things fall apart. So in the future, it's not inconceivable to think that there may be a world trade currency or a common currency across the world. It's not going to happen soon, but it will happen as a result of the monetary crisis that we're just at the beginning of at the moment. And in the longer perspective, the longer range vision of things, in another 40 or 50 or 60 years, just to plant the seed in your mind, it's not inconceivable to think that sustainable resources could provide, in other words, the commons, could provide the value by which currencies are given value and ultimately traded. In other words, there could be such a thing as a sustainability rate rather than an interest rate. Sustainability rate would determine the value of your currency on a daily basis across the world. So instead of looking at the price, you would look at the value of your currency when you're making a decision about what you want to buy. And based on the relative value of your currency on a daily basis, that could easily bring down consumption if the sustainability rate was low on that particular day. In other words, it's not inconceivable that ultimately, with this wired world that we have, and the technological innovations that we have, that currencies could be directly linked to sustainable resources. I have a lot of friends in both the banking industry and in the environmental renewal industry. Environmentalists and bankers are really saying the same thing. They're talking about how resources relate to value, yet they're not talking to each other. If they were talking to each other, maybe they could come to some conclusions that part of the problem is the monetary system itself. If you really think that a Green New Deal is going to solve the problems of the world, really think that by spending money on creating environmental and new alternative resources is going to change the problems in the world and reconfigure the fossil fuel base of societies and world civilization, think again. Because the fact is that at the end of the day, all those people who are taking profits in their new green businesses, following the triple bottom line, they're making wonderful gains in terms of greening their business. At the end of the day, the money that they're taking home is based on currency, which is tied directly to oil for its value. So the oil industry is never going to be displaced as long as the currencies of the world are tied directly into oil for their predominant value. And that's the case today. When central bank looks at how they're going to value their currency, they look at productivity. And the productivity is based largely on oil supplies to generate dynamic economic productivity in that particular economy. So the problem here is that the monetary system and the resources are directly tied together. Economic historians have always realized that there's been a division in the 20th century between the two, and we've got to put those back together. In other words, common resources providing the value of the currency makes great sense, but the bankers of the world have not come to that conclusion yet.
James, thank you very much. You know, I have to say that I'm not a finance person, which I would say maybe there are some here who aren't either. So here I'm thinking trying to get wrapping my mind around this and financing the MDGs. but we're not talking about just financing MDGs. We're really creating a new paradigm, a new way of thinking. And I think, James, that you have a really, you benefit from being, working in multiple different countries with multiple different leaders and people from all over the world. And I think that it's almost like, though you live in the United States, you live in the world. If we can get our mind, but not just our mind, but if we can get our being to know that we live in the world, not just our country, then everything starts to make sense. The idea of this common thing, of course it makes sense. It's not a stretch even. The stretch is getting our being and ourselves to realize that we live in this world, and it's the world we live in, it's not our country. So, a magnificent way of feeling that and saying that. Thank you very much. I know if you're looking at the schedule, you might wonder where we are at this moment. We're going to take another one of those stand-up 5-minute stretch things because